A new jobs report is in. The Labor Department says the economy added 119,000 jobs in September, and that exceeds economists' expectations of 50,000, according to FactSet. Here's more.
However, the pace of hiring remains modest. The unemployment rate rose to 4.4%, above the expected 4.3%. The release of the September jobs report was delayed by over a month due to the 43-day government shutdown, which furloughed staff at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Revisions to prior months show slower growth than initially reported. July's jobs gains were lowered by 7%, by 7,000, while August shifted from a 22,000 gain to a 4,000 loss. Combined employment in those 2 months was 33,000 jobs lower than first reported. Vice President Vance commented on the jobs report this morning while speaking to Breitbart Washington Bureau Chief Matt Boyle. Take a listen.
Huge jobs report, and I assume the market is going crazy right now, probably just opened, because what this shows is that the Trump economic policies are actually working. And you've got 119,000 new jobs. Economists thought that we would have about 50,000 new jobs, but that's actually just the headline number. If you look below the surface, I think the numbers are actually better. The best thing that you can say about the Trump economy is that American jobs are going to American workers for a change, and that's the thing that I'm proudest about with these numbers.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics said yesterday it would not be publishing an employment report for October. It will combine non-farm payrolls for that month with November's report. That's because the recently ended government shutdown prevented the collection of data for the household survey. That means October's unemployment rate will never be known. November's employment report will be released in mid-December. That would be after the Federal Reserve's December policy meeting.
And joining us now to talk about the latest jobs report post-government shutdown is Joseph Trevisani, economic and currency analyst at FXSTREET. So Joseph, always good to see you. How are you doing?
We're doing pretty well. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, always a pleasure to speak with you. So can we start with the 119,000 number here? How would you describe the current state of the labor market?
Well, the labor market is, I think, in better shape than people have been concerned about. That number, more than double what was expected, is a pretty good number, especially considering that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is revamping the way it calculates that number. We had that old issue with the birth-death model, which they've largely done away with. So it's a pretty good number, and I would say it looks good for the economy at this point.
Do the downward revisions of previous months worry you?
Yes and no. I would say at this point probably no. And the reason is because the downward revision to many of those numbers has to do more with the way the BLS was calculating certain portions of the non-farm payrolls each month, rather than an actual reflection of the economy. But you're right. If you go back 12 months, 9 of those 12 months were revised down.
Okay, let's talk about the 4.4% unemployment rate. It ticked up. It seems like it's on a rough trajectory upwards for the past few months. How much emphasis are you putting on this data point?
Well, I think the Fed is putting more emphasis on that than they probably are on the non-farm payrolls. And so I would think that would tilt a little bit towards the Fed's doing what they said they were going to do back in September, and that is cutting rates again in December, even though Mr. Powell seems to be talking that down quite a bit lately. But as a reflection of the economy, I don't think it's of great concern yet. However, and not at that level. However, the trend is, as you would say, in the wrong direction.
So you brought up the Fed, right? So, I mean, does this report change at all the calculus at the Fed?
It gives the Fed hawks, the Fed inflation hawks, who apparently Mr. Powell is part of that group, a little more ammunition to say we can wait on this. We don't need to worry as much as we were or thought we might have to worry about on the job market, on the labor market. And we can focus a little bit more on inflation for one more month or so. After all, inflation has been ticking up as well. It is, almost a full point above what the Fed says they want.
Do you think inflation is under control? Because it as well has been ticking up in the past few months.
I think inflation is under control, but I think it's also under some amount of pressure as well. Two factors are probably impacting it right now. One is labor costs as the administration's labor policies and immigration and border policies, again, are going to affect wages because there are going to be less workers around in various fields, and that is going to drive up wages. In addition, you have some pressure from tariffs. Not a lot, but you have some.
Okay, so inflation at around 3% right now, year over year, and wages, according to the latest September report, 3.8%.
That's right.
So what are your comments on workers' spending power? Is it strong or weak right now?
Well, right now it's a little bit, it's the spending power has been weakening. It was weakened greatly by the bout of inflation that we had under the Biden administration because wages fell far behind the peak of inflation and the decline into where we are now. It is now at a bit of a balance. What you want, of course, and what consumers want, what voters want, is to get the purchasing power back that they lost through the last administration's inflation. So when you look at it in that sense, it's still relatively weak and it's not strong and it's not where I think the administration and others want it to be.
You brought up tariffs, and I'm just wondering, what do you think is the current driver of inflation in the environment right now?
It's an interesting question, and it's a difficult question to say. I think there is some impact, although it's difficult to tease it out from tariffs. I have always thought that even though as the tariff regime was put in place by the Trump administration, it always seemed to me that you would get less likely pressure on inflation than many people were concerned about, mainly because there are, in many fields, for many products, there are domestic manufacturers. Why would any manufacturer lose market share in a very competitive market like the United States by giving the full burden of the tariffs to the consumer? The consumer will simply shift to another purchase. They won't buy from them anymore. So I've always thought that would restrain it. Nevertheless, there is some pressure there. The other, I think, as I said, is from wages and demands and perhaps even some worker shortages in some fields that are going to push wages higher. So that's kind of the real driver at the moment.
Okay, so given everything you've said so far, could you just give us your overview of the current direction of the economy? Where do you think it's headed?
Right now, I think what we're seeing right now is a bit of a pause. If you look at especially the jobs numbers, the job numbers have, the non-farm payroll numbers have halved on a 3-month moving average from a year ago. They were about 133 last September. It's about 62 or something like that now. So jobs have diminished. You have a very long expansion here. So that is the kind of thing which often runs aground. Can the Fed is concerned about where we are, but they don't yet have any real concrete evidence that the economy is faltering. Yes, jobs have weakened, but that's it. So I think right now, what we are looking at is more of the same. It isn't a lot, there isn't a real trend here that's pushing the economy where the economy is going in one direction or another. So even though you look for something that is going up dramatically or going down dramatically, we're not getting that right now. The economy is continuing to trundle along, to muddle through, if you will, and that is pretty good for this stage of an expansion in a mature economy like the United States.
Okay, so speaking of the Fed and how it sees the economy, it's going to meet again next in December.
Right.
And I'm wondering, would it be missing some data when it meets? Because it's not going to get the full October jobs report. Is it going to make a decision with pieces of the puzzle missing?
That's true, they are. But you know, when you look at the way the Fed relates its policy to the economy, they're much more interested, very sensibly so, in trend analysis than they are in particular months. So I don't think that this particular missing labor data is going to matter all that much to the Fed. I really don't. Yes, they're going to be missing November, and they're going to be missing, I guess it would be October and November by the next time that they meet on December 9th and 10th. I don't think it will matter that much. I really don't. So as far as that goes, no, I don't think it's going to make any difference into the way they view their analysis.
Okay, your thoughts on the rate and pace of cuts right now at the Federal Reserve?
I think the Fed probably should have started cutting rates sooner. If you looked at what the European Central Bank did, they did it long before the Fed did. I think whether or not the Fed cuts in December, I think they will continue cutting in the new year. I don't think the economy is remotely strong enough or inflation is remotely dangerous enough right now for the Fed to avoid trying to support the labor market. I think they will. I think cuts will continue next year.
Okay, just one final question. If you compare the U.S. economy to other economies like the UK, Germany, France, it's doing better.
Much better.
What would you attribute this fact to?
There are a lot of factors involved in that, but especially if I look at some of the manufacturing sectors in those countries that you mentioned, I think one of the biggest problems they're having are the energy costs. Their particular energy policies in those countries have caused electricity prices and other prices to skyrocket. And that is a huge burden on an industrial base. And so that I think is probably the biggest problem that they're having right now.
Okay, just one more thing, because you mentioned manufacturing. Manufacturing jobs actually continue to decline in the U.S. as well. And the Labor Secretary acknowledged it, saying it's not been exactly where we want them to be. So if that is the case, then, I mean, the U.S. is not doing well in this aspect as well.
I know, and you're right to point out, because one of the things that the administration and President Trump mentioned repeatedly on for the tariff program that he put in for the tariff policy was he wanted to return manufacturing jobs to the United States to reverse some of the loss that goes back now a generation. I mean, it's 30 years. And that hasn't happened to any really substantial degree. I think the expectations for that were misplaced in time, meaning that it takes a long time for manufacturing facilities, a much greater lead time for manufacturing facilities, for manufacturing abilities to return. And I think that's the problem. You need to keep this particular policy in place for a number of years. All of the trade deals that involve investment here in the United States, and there have been a number of them and spoken about by the administration at length, none of them did any groundbreaking. It takes time to build a manufacturing facility.
Well, all right, Joseph, it's always great to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun to come downtown.
All right.